I think so many of us, whether we're church people or not, whether we follow Jesus or not, whether we're in this country or not, are living with an incomplete joy. It's killing us. Because when we don't experience the joy and the celebration that God is actually trying to give us, when we don't experience it with him, we chase all these other things. We chase work, we chase promotions, we chase relationships, we chase finances, we chase jobs or positions or titles or houses. We chase all these other things that are guaranteed to deliver less than complete joy. And it puts us in this cycle over and over and over again of going, maybe I was wrong. That quite didn't deliver what I was after. So maybe it's the next thing or the next rung or the next position or the next dollar or the next baby, whatever it is. We're so wired to just keep pursuing, keep working, keep trying when God is sitting here going, I have a gift. I have a gift in it so that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. This last line lends itself so well even to today because it's an invitation to a celebration. Don't just keep this between me and you, God says. This is for us. That there's joy, that there's celebration, that there's transformation that takes place within a community of God's people who love each other, who celebrate each other, who celebrate what God is doing in their midst, in their lives, in their families, in the community, in the world. When the church comes and gathers to celebrate, it changes everything. And it's the invitation that God keeps giving us. Too often, we skip this essential spiritual discipline. We skip it. We as people, I'll be the first. I'll put my hand up. We skip this because we almost demote it. It's like, this is just partying. Like, we'll party later, right? We'll get to that later, or we'll get there someday. Like right now, there's things to do, or there's people to see, or there's places to go, there's accomplished tasks to be, whatever. It's so often we get consumed with whatever the next thing is, and we don't learn to sit as a people of God and celebrate not what we are doing, not what we have done, not what we have accomplished, but what he has done, what he's accomplished, what he has done on our behalf. The discipline of celebration causes us to stop and to celebrate and to enjoy what God has already done. Richard Foster wrote this book. It's called Celebration of Disciplines. It's where a lot of the series pulled its content from, as it highlights different spiritual disciplines. And in that book, here's what he says. He said, the spiritual discipline of celebration leads us into a perpetual jubilee of the Spirit. We are rejoicing in the goodness and the greatness of God. Celebration comes to us as a result of all of the spiritual disciplines having done their work in our lives. Without joy penetrating all of the disciplines, they will quickly deteriorate into another set of soul-killing legalisms. All too often, we highlight prayer, or we highlight study, or we highlight worship, or we highlight any of these other spiritual disciplines that in themselves they're good and they're wholesome and they lead us to the person of Jesus. But if we lack celebration, if we lack the enjoyment of what God has done and what God has accomplished, instead of us, when we lack that, when we lack the joy in these disciplines, it leads us to a place of legalism, to a place of bondage, to a place of frustration and anger and guilt and shame because we keep being reminded, I can't do it. I can't fix it, or I can't stop that sin, or I can't fix the relationship, or I can't undo the divorce. I can't fix what is broken in my life. So often we miss it. We just miss it, and we carry in this burden of like, I need to fix, then I can celebrate, rather than resting in who God says he is, who he's demonstrated himself to be for ages. We forget to just rest in him and celebrate so that we might experience the joy, the complete joy that he talks about, that he intends to give us. I was at a church in Wisconsin about a week and a half ago, and it was this conference called Intimacy with God. And so I remember showing up like, okay, I'm curious to see what this is like, and my experience of the church, it was pretty amazing, like especially like being a pastor there when nobody knows I'm a pastor. It's kind of like I can just be invisible. Like I can just watch, I can just observe, like so many of you get to do like on Sunday. You get to watch the people around you. And so I kind of hung back and I watched. And this people was so overwhelmed with joy. Like they couldn't wait to worship. They couldn't wait to sing. I mean, people were up, their hands in the air, they're dancing around. I mean, they're doing stuff I don't know how to do. I'm not allowed to do that in public. There are kids that are running around and they're singing, and like you just see their faces and they're beaming. It's like, I'm at a celebration. Conference, you think like, okay, sit down and you get your pen and click and you're ready to take a bunch of notes. This was not that. This was a party. This was a celebration. This was a people who understood what God was doing in their midst, and they just couldn't help but let it out. They just had to celebrate. They just had to get it out. They had to do that. I shared this first service, and I didn't want to. It's not in my notes. I don't ever plan on sharing stuff like this. But like when I was in high school, I did this really weird thing in secret that nobody knew about until I advertised it last service. And I would go upstairs to my room, and I would put headphones in, and I would blast music. Sometimes it was worship music, sometimes it wasn't, but I would turn off the lights so that even I didn't have to endure it, and I would just move. I would just dance. I would do things that I will never do in front of any of you. I would just move. It was like, man, I'm just trying to celebrate. I'm trying to get this out. Like there's a piece in every one of us that wants to lean in 100% to celebration, and then what are the things that stand in our way? Everything I just highlighted. You know, King David, I read this not too long ago, just in my own devotion. King David was coming back. God had delivered them in a really amazing way. And as he comes into the city, he's just rejoicing and he's celebrating. And it says he was wearing a loincloth, which is like, well, that's interesting, right? King is out there in his underwear and he's dancing and he's moving and he's shaking, whatever. It's like he's so in tune with the discipline of celebration. And even the Bible talks about the people around him, like the people right next to him felt freedom to go out and do and be and join him in celebration. But not everybody felt that way. David says, I'll be even more undignified than this as I worship, as I celebrate, as I give myself because of what my God has done for me. So let me ask you this question. What's worth celebrating in your life right now? Don't just look to the next thing. Don't just move on. Don't miss what God is doing or has already done in your life. What is worth celebrating right now in your marriage, in your family, in your relationship with your kids, in your own personal walk or relationship with Him, maybe at work, maybe just fun, something on the side, maybe even financial? What's worth celebrating in your life right now? Have you taken the time to celebrate, or are you already on to the next thing? God's inviting you to celebrate what He's doing in your life. He's celebrating it. Why don't we? If you say, right now is just a really hard season. Right now it's super difficult. Right now things aren't good in my marriage. Things aren't good with my kids. Things aren't good personally or emotionally or mentally or physically, right? You may look at a lot of things in your life right now and you say, David, it's not good. And it's so stinking difficult for me to celebrate right now. Let me ask you this question. What's worth celebrating in the next life? Because if you're a Jesus follower, the greatest gift He could have ever given you has already been given. And it's the person of Jesus. And He said, regardless of the pain, regardless of the trial, regardless of the struggle, or what you're going through right now, regardless of that, Jesus has already conquered the enemy. He's already conquered the grave. He's already conquered death. So death doesn't get a final shot. So what's worth celebrating in this next life? If you have a relationship with Jesus, everything. Because the war's already been won. Regardless of what happens, regardless of what I go through, Jesus even promises, in this world you will have trouble. But then he says, but take heart, for I've overcome it. What's worth celebrating as a Jesus follower? It's sometimes instead of looking back, we just need to look forward. Let's change our timeline here. Let's look forward to eternity and talk about and think about how we get to celebrate with Jesus forever because of what he did and what he accomplished on the cross for us. But that requires us to look back about 2,000 years ago. And we see what Jesus did on the cross so that cancer doesn't get the final word, so that divorce doesn't get the final word, so that bankruptcy doesn't get the final word, so that addiction doesn't get the final word. Whatever it is that you're holding on to, I want to tell you there's a gift for you today. And it's from God himself saying, I want to give this to you. I want you just to celebrate it. I want you to celebrate what I've already done and accomplished on your behalf. Said differently, it's this: the discipline of celebration points to what God has already done, not what we have accomplished. This discipline leads us into a complete joy that's found only in Jesus. For so long, my life growing up, my dad's a pastor. Some of you know that, some of you don't. I grew up in church, and I had this resentment towards church. I always carried in. I was reminded of all of my shortcomings, all of my faults, all of my brokenness, all of my pain, all of my baggage. It's like the sin that I carried in. I was just reminded of it Sunday after Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. But the reminder in me was like, David, you're not good enough. You can't fix it. You already screwed up this morning, or you screwed up last week, or you screwed up on Saturday night. You screwed up. It was always this recurring, ongoing theme of like, man, no matter how hard I try to be a Jesus follower, no matter how hard I try to have a life that actually looks like Jesus sort of depicts, like I'm not even close to the sort of, no matter how hard I try, I just kept coming in defeated. And we do this funny thing when we feel rejected, is we reject the thing we feel rejected by. So for years, I would show up to church like this. I don't want this. I don't need this. I can't beat it anyway, or I can't fight anyway, or I can't be good enough anyway, so why try? It fostered this sort of rebellion and resentment until I actually understood the person of Jesus. I still remember I was in college for the first time and understand how overwhelmingly God loved me. Despite my sin, despite my shame, despite my flaws, despite my reputation, despite my brokenness, despite the history that I seem to be reminded of regularly, God said, yeah, but do you know what I did long before that? And do you know what I'm going to do with you forever? There was a freedom that showed up when I understood the gift that God intended to give. And it's the same gift that's on the table for you right now. Maybe you haven't accepted that gift. Maybe you've been operating in your relationship with God from the mentality of like, I just have to do more. I have to work harder. I have to perform better. I have to fix XYZ thing, or this thing about me that I don't want anybody to know, or the thing that I feel like is a disqualifier in my relationship with God. Once that's good, then I'll give my life to the Lord. That's not how it works. Jesus says, you're enough. Just come, just receive, just sit with me. The greatest invitation he gives his followers, his disciples, is to sit and abide in Jesus. That's all he's asking you. You know how much freedom comes when we actually do that.